Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Making the Argument. We've got a special episode where we're going to do another interview, this time with the legendary, the man, the myth, the legend, John Lovell. I am your host, Nick Freitas, and I want to thank you all once again for watching and just remind everybody that we have our live show Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then we do these interviews not only to be able to give us some more topics, to be able to discuss issues with our live audience, but to really be able to kind of do a deep dive into the lives and the work of people that are going out there and fighting for the things that they believe in, that are going forward and building intentional communities, that are ensuring that they're conducting themselves, that they're living their lives in accordance with the principles that they advocate. And that certainly describes, in my opinion, John Lovell. I met John at a place that you probably wouldn't expect. The first time I met John was actually at a Homesteaders convention, is a Homesteaders of American convention here in Virginia. And I want to tell you right now, there was some huge names there. Justin Rhodes, Joel Salatin, Jess and Jeremiah from Roots and Refuge. I mean, Off Grid with Doug and Stacy. But I think, I could be wrong, but I think the most watched, the best attended speaking event at that entire convention, which had thousands and thousands of people there, was John Lovell describing how to defend your homestead. And it was an awesome discussion because guess what? It wasn't, go get an ADT security system, right? No, it was John Lovell explaining. And I'm sitting here having flashbacks from my military days. John Lovell explaining of how would you actually, no kidding, if you had to defend your home and your family. So with all of that, John, thank you so much for being on today.
Thrilled to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Well, hey, listen, I am pretty sure that most of my audience is well aware of John Lovell because when we mentioned within our community chat, well, first of all, before we even mentioned that we were going to have you on for an interview, we had a ton of people in our community chat going, you need to interview John Lovell. You guys would get along great. So but for the 2 or 3 people that watch our show that don't know John Lovell yet, don't know Warrior Poet Society, can you tell us a little bit about your background, family, military, and then I really want to do a deep dive into Warrior Poet Society.
Sure. So I've hopped around and done a lot in my life so far. I was a military guy, served a handful of tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment, an early GWAT, got out, went to get a degree in business. I've done some business stuff. I was a foreign Christian missionary abroad for years, and I've been doing tactical training stuff. And then I made the Warrior Poet Society and wrote a book. And then I came here and talked to you today. So that brings us up to the present.
That sums it up. How many kids?
Two kids. A 9-year-old boy and an 11-year-old boy.
Oh gosh. All right. So right at the age where they can really start doing some damage. That's
It's fun years. I was reading to my boys last night. This is such a funny, stupid little story, but I was reading books to my boys last night. We do family reading time, and we're going through all these epic saga books, but this is a fictitious one, and I'm reading through this book. And my boys are in it, and my boys will come and lay on me and like start snuggling, and their hands start creeping up to get in like prime tickle position. And they'll try to tickle me all of a sudden with this big attack. And I'm like, oh, you'll pay for that. And I put down the book and I started tickling my oldest one, who's 11. And he was just in the throes of hysteria. You know, he was losing his mind. And throughout it, it was so weird. He shouted out the word, he said, Baggins, Shire. Like he was being Gollum tortured for information. And I just deep belly laughed. That was a good memory. That happened last night. And so I'm just thinking about it. And I don't know why I thought of that and why I'm taking up your airtime for it. But
no, that's great.
It's the good stuff right there, man.
No, that's what it's about. Well, yeah, like, I mean, you did, I mean, again, several tours with 75th Ranger Regiment, and, you know, anybody who knows, and obviously, you know, I was in the military too for 11 years on active duty, and Ranger Regiment really is, I think, like one of the premier light infantry, you know, special operations units in the world, not just in the United States. And you know, you went from there, you went into the mission field. Can you tell us some of the countries you went to in the mission field?
Sure. So Nicaragua, Panama, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. Those were the main ones.
Wow. Now, where did you meet your wife along the way?
I met her right after I left the military. I went to college to finish a degree, and I met her there.
So love at first sight, or did you guys date a while?
Not at all. And I was on the prowl. I'd had enough near-death experiences that I'm like, I'm ready to settle down with a cute little Southern belle. And that'll be fantastic. And so I was on the prowl. I was looking for a wife, and I knew enough in my mid-20s what I didn't want. And so I was able to eliminate gals pretty darn quickly. And I dismissed her right away. She looked very easy on the eyes, dating someone else who was a buddy of mine. And she just looked like a bit of a diva, like a beauty queen. She was quite literally, the beauty pageant winner for the university I attended. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not touching that. I've seen the hot crazy matrix. No, sir. And so I cut that off.
So you saw her level of hot and assumed the crazy had to be high?
Bro, this woman, break contact, man, break contact. And so it was about a year later when we really, there were some clues and some conversations we had. And I'm like, oh, wow, this girl is something else. And I fell hard in love in a very short amount of time. I knew I was in love with her in a way that I'd never been. And within a month, within 5 months, I asked her to marry me, and our engagement was 2 months long. Yeah. So we got married pretty darn quick. It was hot and heavy, man. So.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So, and how long you been married now?
We are in our 17th year.
Oh, that's outstanding.
What about you and your bride?
I actually met Tina my freshman year of high school. I could tell you what chair I was sitting in and what class I was in the day she walked through the door. And I remember thinking to myself, and this is before we had a hot, crazy metrics to deal with, right? So I'm like operating in the blind here. All I knew was too hot for me. Like I knew that was, I knew enough to know that was probably the case. And we didn't actually start dating until our senior year. And it was right before I enlisted and went into the military. And I remember thinking my senior year, it was this whole idea of, there's no way this girl could be that into me. Like there's got to be a catch. There's got to be some sort of cosmic trick that is being played right here. And I was determined to play it cool, because I did not play it cool in high school. Like I was the kid watching like Civil War documentaries, and I wanted to go to West Point at that time. Yeah. And so I was I played sports and things like that, but kind of an old soul in some respects. And so there's just no way. There's just no way that the hot pretty girl likes me. But kind of to your point about like different things that kind of key you in. One of the things that really just impressed me about Tina from the get-go was this idea of she would stand up for the things that she believed in, and she really didn't care what the popular cast thought about it. She would stick up for people that no one would stick up for. And that was really impressive. That really spoke to me about her character. And then went off to basic, got done with infantry basic training in beautiful Sand Hill, Fort Benning, Georgia. And we got married, about 5 months after I got to the 82nd. And it was we got engaged, and she had 2 months to plan the wedding. I had nothing to do with planning the wedding. My job was to show up in uniform and say I do, and mission accomplished. So, and that was 24 years ago. So yeah,
that is awesome. But, awesome, bravo, guys. That's great.
Yeah. So to that point, like anybody that has watched your content, read your book. I'm reading your book right now, and you put a great deal of emphasis. You take the experiences that you've had from doing what you're talking about, and the way I would describe it, please, put your own description. But there is, I think, kind of a crisis of masculinity going on right now in the country at whole. This whole idea where you've got a lot of not just young men, but I would argue that's in many respects kind of where the crisis point is taking place. You got young men kind of wondering what does it actually mean to be a man, and they almost seem kind of lost. They're in the wilderness right now. And you talk a lot about, for lack of a better term, the kind of the antidote to that. Right. So tell us, what was it that cued you in to saying out of all the things? Again, you were in the military, a lot of veterans write books about being in Afghanistan or being in Iraq. You were in the mission field, could have wrote about that, right? And it's not that you don't incorporate key points, but what made you write about this specifically, and the whole concept behind Warrior Poet Society? What was the moment where you thought, man, this is needed?
It's really just an outgrowth of my own personal journey. And that's all Warrior Poet Society has really ever been. I'm on this warrior poet kind of journey, and I recognize these two archetypes as absolutely critical. I think a man is meant to be fully a warrior and all the wonderful attributes that come from a warrior. And that's perseverance and grit and courage and strength and boldness. A dude is supposed to be all of that, to be able to hunt, protect, provide, that kind of stuff. You bring the warrior into your workplace to Sun Tzu that action and do really, really well, earn. And so those are all warrior aspects that you absolutely need. However, there's also in this archetype of poet a whole bunch of other attributes that if you don't encapsulate and embody as a man, you're going to be an utter failure. You're going to tough guy yourself into an absolutely ruined and wasted life, and you'll never even know why. It's because you're an idiot. You didn't understand that the most important stuff, it isn't just fighting for freedom, it's actually enjoying it. It's actually devoting yourself to a cause bigger than yourself. It's being carried away by beauty and awe. It's by tapping into romance and deep relationships and all the aspects of a poet. Seeking beauty and truth and meaning and significance, all those other stuff where we're so busy beating our chest, doing the whole warrior thing, we escape the fact of the poet stuff that holds the most important aspects of your life together are utterly missed. I sometimes explain this to dudes by making a run for the Second Amendment. A lot of our guys listening in will absolutely be like, yeah, Second Amendment. And I'll say, what's more important, do you think, the First or the Second Amendment? And it'd be easy for us to point out that the founders put it second for a reason. Now, it's true that none of the other amendments stay. If you lose the Second Amendment, that's the right to keep and bear arms. It's the sentinel. It's the guarantee that we keep our other freedoms, because ultimately, all laws are enforced with violence. And if you give government monopoly on violence, well, you lose all of your freedoms. And so you could say the Second Amendment's the most important because it is the safeguarding of it. I'm like, no, remember the founders put the first one, the right of, or the freedom of speech and religion and assembly and due process and freedom of the press, all that stuff. And really, when you think about these things, that's all the stuff that matters the most. That's where meaning dwells. That's where morality dwells. It's the most important stuff is in those freedoms. It's not the protection of the freedoms. It is the actual freedoms themselves. And so the Second Amendment is a means to an end. It's not an end in of itself. And in the same way, the poetic aspects are where all the real biggest stuff that matters the most in life dwell. And so I was cognizant of this, and I have been for a very long time. My dilemma is though before I really even had the language for warrior and poet and these archetypes that I've engineered and really speak in terms of, before I really even had put that together, I knew it intrinsically. It had been revealed to me. I knew I needed to grow in those poet pieces, which didn't come natural to me. And I was really far more lion than lamb. And so everything that I'm doing is kind of calling men up into that, of be fully a lover and fully a fighter, warrior and poet, lion and lamb, be both, or you are deficient as a man.
That was one of the themes that really struck me in the book, was the idea that this is not an either or proposition. And part of the problem is that we do have people that sometimes look at it an either or proposition, and it ends up creating deficiency.
Right.
And it is amazing to me that, like, I know right now when we talk about masculinity and the crisis of masculinity, a lot of it is focused on those warrior attributes. We feel like there has been, or I feel like there has been in many cases, kind of like the over feminization. And one of the things that I think is so important about what you talk about is that to be the poet does not mean to feminize men. It means to take other attributes which are also masculine but applied in such a way. The way my wife described it once, and she goes, Nick, it's not that I'm looking for you to be vulnerable, right? But it's the idea of you being tender toward your wife, toward your children, and things like that, and how that aspect and those attributes, when they're properly learned, developed, and then implemented, does round out like what the picture of masculinity is supposed to be. And I would argue that's true within a biblical framework. I think it plays out practically in real life. So let me ask you this. The warrior stuff is pretty easy. I mean, obviously, from a fairly young age, you gravitated toward those aspects. You served in the military, and again, you didn't just serve in the military as to say, you did 3 years during peacetime. You racked up quite a few combat tours in a relatively short period of time with one of the most elite units in the military. And so it's coming face to face with danger, with violence, responding to it, working with other people within a team. So I'm not really curious on where you got the warrior part down, right? Like there's a lot of things leading up to that, during that, and I'm sure after that you could point to as things that you harnessed and developed and whatnot. But on the poet side, where did you find inspiration to specifically develop kind of that more of that respect or more of that appreciation for the aesthetic, the beauty, the written word, the ability to communicate effectively and in a romantic fashion, like a genuine, not this Lord Byron kind of cheap but like in a genuine romantic fashion. Like where did you kind of seek out inspiration and education in that realm of your life?
I'm glad you just kind of did a pop shot at the old romantic poets, because I'm like, man, the romantic era, that poetry sucked. But I really like a very narrow amount of poetry. Of like, never send me poetry, guys. I almost like no one's poetry. I like some of my own. I like some of the greats out there. I like some eclectic, weird stuff that nobody's heard of. Anyway, I think there's been a lot of different stuff. Every guy can have fingerprints of this. You see something beautiful that just takes your breath away, whether it's like crisp morning in the mountains, and it's just, a cool air and walking through and you're like, holy cow, there is something more to all this, or it's when your blood turns on fire because you see people being lied to, and that justice element kind of creeps up and you're able to argue and espouse truth, or whenever you look into your bride's eyes and you just kind of melt and I'm like, this girl, you feel those romantic fires, and there's everywhere you look you can find what the poet really majors on. You understand that there's so much more to life of meaning and truth, justice, purpose, value, morality, doing the right thing, and all that stuff is where the poet really camps out and lives. And I found the pursuit to be a lot more interesting than shaving off a few splits on my draw stroke and making steel sing at a range. I was just shooting yesterday. It was pretty darn fun. So it's even fresh, as I say. These elements, the poetic elements, are the most important. It's where you're going to find meaning and value, and where you're going to really be able to help your fellow man. I would say for me, though, I didn't really care too much about it. Though I had these glimpses that I'm just rattling off, and I think everyone listening in, they'll be able to identify and be like, I know what he's talking about. Yep, absolutely. For me, I had a very weird encounter in 2001. It was around May 20th, May 22nd time period, somewhere around there. I had this weird, I say weird, it was a pretty violent conversion to Christianity. I wasn't like it just, I felt like God spoke to me and he converted me, and all of a sudden things I didn't care about changed in a day, and all of a sudden I did care about them. I developed a love for learning and reading, and also a passion for teaching that I didn't have a few days before. And that was like a light switch going on. just super bright. And that never went away, my passion for learning. And so I'd be able to inhale, I'd be able to go nose down and have 8-hour study days on my own reading books. And I'd get so into it, I'd forget to eat lunch. And that was a common thing. Becca would come in and be like, what'd you eat for lunch today? I'm like, she's like, John, did you forget to eat? And I'm like, I did. I read books all day long. So some peculiar things happened to me. And also kind of the romantic in me, the one who had a heart of faith, that really just burst into being from nothing, ex nihilo. It was not there, and then it was. And so that was a pretty remarkable conversion. Now, people listening in, you may not like that. All I can do is, I don't have an angle here. I'm just saying, hey, you asked the question, and this is my account. This is just my history. So for me, it was an odd genesis.
No, that's I appreciate that too. We have a lot of, when we do a live show, there's a lot of things that get said and off the cuff. And one of the things we tell people a lot is like, look, you don't got to like what I'm saying. I'm telling you what I think is true, or I'm telling you what actually happened, and it is what it is at that point. You make your own decision with what you want to do. So I appreciate the fact of having a moment where there's a moment of clarity. There's a moment of that divine intervention, or that divine spark, where all of a sudden you feel a purpose in a meeting, or maybe even an affinity for something, and you're driven toward it.
Sure.
What would you say? Let's talk a little bit about work in the mission field and whatnot. What drove you, or what drove you, or what opportunities presented themselves that said that, hey, not only am I gonna, there's a lot of people within the church and whatnot that will sometimes go on a missions trip, and sometimes it's for a variety of reasons, right? And I think the missions field is a wonderful thing. But you obviously went several times. You were going back, and you were kind of going back to similar locations and whatnot. What was a driving factor behind that?
Mine, I wasn't visiting, I was living. I lived overseas as a full-time missionary for 4 years. Yeah. And so there was 1 year where I only spent like 11 days in the States. So I mean, like I wasn't running back and forth. I lived over. That was my address. Yeah. So I think the whole idea of foreign Christian missions has a weird American mass consumerism to it, especially in the short run, where you run up an incredible travel bill and you go overseas, and then you paint the same building that just got painted a couple months ago. It's like busy work, and you don't know the language or anything, and you send out support letters, so everyone's kind of funding your vacation, and you hope it's helping some, but I noticed in short-term work that it was really, really hard to make any lasting value, and it actually could hurt the community. There's a great book called When Helping Hurts, and it's amazing how often our desire to help folks and do a good thing can actually really hurt. There is a good way to do short-term missions, but usually that's you find a church or ministry that is in the culture in a long-term area, and then you just show up and be like, hey, what can we do? Would you rather just send some money? You guys need money, or you need boots on the ground, or you want us to run medical missions? What do you need us to do? You want us to build some stuff? Have we got some skills? And then you let them tell what it would be like to be able to be a benefit from them. Yeah. It could be as simple as like you show up and you just babysit the full-time missionaries' kids so they can go out on a date night. I'm like, that's good ministry, bro. Anyway, we really did want to help, and it was a unique mission experience. I lived with 30 college-age students, and I was their full-time Bible teacher. That's where I learned to teach. I would later drag that into the firearms world, and a lot of what I learned on how to teach and communicate really well and capture attention and convey complex points by breaking them into simple a lot of that I learned from day in, day out, hours every day teaching on the mission field. And it drove me to study too. So I learned all the big words, the ecclesiology, eschatology, soteriology, missiology, all the ologies. I studied it, church history and Christian worldview apologetics, hermeneutics, homiletics. And so I learned all the fun stuff. And I was able to, for years, I just became a nerd like you mentioned the Civil War, and I would be totally regaled with Civil War trivia from the great Shelby Foote. And so,
yeah, you broke out. Yeah,
Hey,
I was like, the introductory people might drop like a Bruce Canton, but if you're saying Shelby Foote, it's like, okay, all right.
Shelby Foote, bro. I came to play. I came to play. So anyway, that was kind of our mission field experience. We planted a church overseas, and it was a great time. Spend every dime we had, wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you say that about too about the mission field. I do think that I think missions are great, and like I said, I think there's a great place for short-term missionary work. But yeah, sometimes I've seen some of the stuff that churches have especially done economically, where like, all right, we're going to send a bunch of this over, whatever the this is, whatever the commodity is, and it's like, all right, well. That might have helped. Of course, you might have also just flooded the market with a bunch of cheap products that completely ran out the local, people that were actually doing that. Or, did we build any what we would have called in the military host nation capacity here, or did we kind of make ourselves feel better about doing something without really understanding the operational environment and the need and hey, how's the Holy Spirit working in this area, and how do we come alongside that? I heard somebody put it once. They said, you don't you don't tell God what you want to do and ask him to join you. You ask what God's doing, and then you join him.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's interesting. So you lived down there for a good period. Like how long overall did you say were you? Like
4 years.
4 years in the mission field. So 4 years in the mission field. You come back to the States, and is that where you kind of go into? The training with respect to shooting, with respect to defense?
That's right.
Okay.
Kind of dusted off an old hat, put it back on, and I needed to make a living. We spent everything we had, and we actually fell pretty bad into debt, which sucked as well, and we're just trying to make ends meet. And I remember getting a job and thinking, all right, this will be enough, and it totally wasn't enough. Prices had gone up. We had rented a house when we came back to the States. Thought it'd be good. We had kids at this time. They were born while we were abroad. Wow. And we had the desire to homeschool as well. We had come along the conviction that we didn't want to send them off to the government to educate. We wanted to do it. And so, we started doing that, and very quickly ran up quite a tab of credit card debt, which is not, I have a finance degree of I knew better than that. Hey, the income greatly was less than the output. And I mean, there's only so much you can cut. And so we ended up moving out of that house and got this tiny little apartment so we could afford to homeschool and stay single income, which is very difficult these days, it turned out. So we moved into a little apartment, and I drove a vehicle that's 25 years old or so. And, my wife had an older vehicle as well. And we just tried to earn our way up. But I went back into the old expertise I needed to earn.
People, I think, sometimes have a bad habit of looking at, if you go onto YouTube right now and you look at Warrior Poet Society and you're looking at, 1.4 million subscribers and whatnot, and you've got other projects that you're doing kind of underneath that and the training and whatnot. And it's so easy for people to look at the success after the fact and be like, oh, well, you're so privileged. It's like, okay, maybe in some, maybe blessed in some areas, but again, you were coming back out of the mission. You and your wife with kids are coming back out of the mission field. You don't have any money. You're living in a little apartment, and you're trying to, and when you're in that spot, because man, I definitely remember being a young married E2, and for a while there, the single income, and it's tough, right? Like it is going to the grocery store and running your card through and praying that somehow magically God made your accounts, balance so you can get the groceries. And when you're in that moment and you're making additional sacrifices to try to homeschool and things like that, it can be really hard to see a way out of it, especially if you're working really hard just to pay the bills. And now you've got to do something on top of that. There are so many people right now, especially young men that I talk to, that feel like, this is all just, it's impossible. Like like, how do you do it? So you were there. Yeah. Wife, kids, small apartment. I also know what it is to have that feeling of almost like I've had moments in life where I had a feeling of like guilt. Like, am I really providing the sort of life for my family that I should be, that, because you're struggling. How did you guys go from a point where you were in a financial situation you didn't want to be in? There was things you wanted to be able to provide for your kids. You're already working really hard to try to make that happen, and now you're going to do something extra? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, and so I didn't have this great illustrious plan to do Warrior Poet Society anything. I was working a beat for a different tactical training company, and so I'd been doing that for a few years, and I was good at it. I was losing my librarian body that I'd cultivated carefully amongst a lot of old dusty theological books on the mission field. So I was starting to work out again and building up some speed and sharpening up some old skills and getting back in the rung of it. But what I found is I was a very, very good communicator at that time. And I was able to add a pretty deep knowledge of tactical principles, and I had some experience under my belt. And so I was able to get better and better at that. But it wasn't until I started really documenting my journey online. I was a born communicator and teacher, and I want to be in relationship with folks. And I don't need to be a billionaire and have my name written across the sky. I want some, I want to communicate for life change. I would like to know that I'm providing value for other folks. And that makes me feel like $1,000,000. I really like that. And so I'm content with less, but I did want that. And I found myself in a windowless building, kind of cut off from people. And so it was, when I started making videos and putting them out online, I'm like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm believing. This is where I'm at. It struck a chord, and the Lord blessed it. And it really just took off and exploded. And it turned out there was a lot of guys that thought a lot like me. And whereas at the time it seemed you were either, kind of like a Hugh Grant, blue-eyed pretty boy, you're a lover, or you're a fighter, just filled with this bravado, like mechanized 1,000-yard stare killer. There's no room for sissy stuff. Yeah. And I just looked at both of these wide pendulum, paradigms, and I just called horse crap on both. And I'm like, I could be both, though, shouldn't it be both? Isn't anyone else doing it? It was like the tactical community. I'm like, these guys all are walking around like they're the baddest things. That bull crap, man, whatever. Yeah, you tough guy, hopefully you've got another side to you. Hopefully you're able to play with your children and be a goof, and you're sweet with your wife, and things are going. But I wanted to be able to honestly document my journey, and I called it the Warrior Poet Society, the Warrior Poet Way, and invited people along. And so, that brought up traction. It was very scary for months and months early on. I just was grinding because it's really kind of burned the ships, and I jumped in this thing. And I really would even say I felt forced into it. I felt forced, rushed into it. And so anyway, but...
well, were you working as you were also developing that? Or was it just like, nope, I'm going to stop doing this, I'm going to do this?
No, I was working doing this other thing. And anyway, I'd say my employer was going in one direction, I was going in another, and eventually I was not able to stay there anymore. Sure. Though I really did want to. I didn't have this plan to branch off, but of like, we were just going different ways. They wanted to go more of like the military contracts, law enforcement kind of route. They wanted to do that thing, and I'm like, no, I want to go toward the civilian. I've been out of the military a while. I'm not fresh anymore. I'm a civilian more and more. I want to speak to the civilians, and I want to use social media to do it. And so they were going the complete opposite direction. And so I tried to skate that line for a little while. It just didn't work. And so I felt kind of pushed out the door to this other. And then I'm looking at them like, well, here it is, Warrior Poet Society. And then I went for it. And it was scary. It was pretty scary. But I grinded out. I did a whole bunch of teaching and instructing, and just picked up all the gigs that I could. And I just tried to look through the camera. And instead of trying to make a video, I wanted to actually imagine there's people that are struggling with the same stuff I'm going to give them a real word. I'm going to communicate something that matters to them. I'm going to help them. I'm going to teach them something that I know. And it struck a chord, and it took off.
No, that's great. I'll tell you one of the things I appreciate about that, with the idea of speaking out to kind of the civilian world. My son is at an age right now where he's looking to go into the military. And, at first, I think when he was younger and that date was years in the future, not a year in the future, my wife and all was a little bit more like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, you can be like daddy and whatnot. And then, he starts developing interests and ideas and concepts of what he wants to do professionally and how he wants to develop. And then, and so she's thinking, okay, yeah, he's probably going to look at the military through the lens of developing some of those technical skills that he wants. And then, the question gets asked, what do you want to do in the military? He goes, infantry. She was not expecting that.
No.
She was not expecting that. He's 17.
Okay.
So this is a next year. Yeah, he's going to turn 18 in September. This is a next year proposition, right? Because he's going to finish high school this year, and then go in. And I think she was like, well, wait, no, why infantry? And I think part of it's because I started off infantry and then went the SF route and whatnot. But it was this idea of I think sometimes as dads, we look back and like, oh yeah, I did say some of these things. And it's, if he's going to go into the military and he's going to serve, then he wants to go into the military occupational skill that's going to teach him, combat. I mean, let's face it, the infantry is the basic fighting unit of any military in the world ever. Right. It's the ultimate symbol of kind of organic combat power right there. That's what it is. And it's like rawest form. There's I forget, like over 200 different military occupational skills. Infantry one is close with and kill the enemy. That's right. And so, we're going through that, and I was thinking to myself, because I'm concerned with a lot of things that have been going on in our country culturally. Right. There's a lot of institutions within our country that I used to kind of take on face value. That there's no such thing as a perfect institution, right? If you want perfection, look to God, not to man. But there are institutions which can help a man develop into what I believe is a good proper man, a person that's going to provide, protect, defend the innocent and be righteous and look to preserve justice. And I always saw the military as one of those things could absolutely affect develop and train those aspects of masculinity. Right. And I still believe that's true. I've become a lot more concerned with how temporary occupants of political office decide to utilize that instrument, and what it was made for versus what it's becoming has been very, very concerning. And my primary concern is with the individuals that still want to go in and serve and put on the uniform, and they're doing it with that intention. And all of a sudden, we have politicians that want to use it as a mechanism for social engineering and get us involved in places where I would argue the United States has no business being involved. Or if you're going to do it, at least have Congress at least display enough courage to actually vote for it instead of just kind of letting the executive branch do whatever. Right. But I say all of that. To go back to this idea that I almost grew up with this mentality that, I have to serve in the military. Now I wanted to. But I have to serve in the military because it's an element of testing I have to go through. It's an element of training I have to go through. Going to combat, I can remember feeling like I need to be tested. I need to be tested. I need to know that when that moment of testing comes, I'm going to do what is expected of me. Right. And that was a huge drive for me. And more, I think it's becoming necessary for us to once again recognize that you don't have to look to certain worldly institutions as the only place to get that.
That's great. No.
You have to. There are other ways to foster and develop these skill sets. Not putting anything against going into the military or law enforcement or first responders. I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. I absolutely right. We both chose to do that. Right. But it's not the only way. It's not the only way to develop the skill sets that you need to be the warrior. But there needs to be people that can actually show people the way. How do you do it? How do you speak into that desire to develop those skill sets in a very, very practical way, right? Not just go to the range and plink around and shoot, or even go to like a special range where, oh, I got to shoot a belt-fed, machine gun. Aren't I cool? Like, well, no, that's a cool experience. It doesn't make you cool because you did that. What makes it cool or a capability is when that you understand both the purpose for why these tactics, why this equipment exists, and how to effectively implement it for the good. And the fact that you chose that path in a world where we don't have a lot of outlets that are actually demonstrating that, I think is important. So you're going through this, you're kind of cataloging the journey that you're going on. And you're still, you're showing people how to utilize these skill sets, how to utilize certain equipment, and how to learn certain tools to achieve certain, noble instincts and whatnot. What do you, as you're developing, because again, I'm really interested in this developing of the poet side as well, because I see a backlash coming. I get really concerned when I see how much there's been this attempt to make attributes of masculinity, which are perfectly natural, right? The aggression, competitiveness, the desire to physically compete. To mentally compete. These have all been turned into, well, these are attributes of toxic masculinity. It's like, no, these are attributes of masculinity which can be used for good or they can be used for ill, and they have to be developed in such a way. And so there's been a lot of this pushback, which I think is necessary, on developing those sort of raw masculine physical traits designed around, hey, get yourself in shape, right? Like, lose the excess weight, go get in shape, learn how to fight, learn how to shoot, learn how to do the things that are necessary on a basic level to be able to protect yourself, your family, and the things you love. Mm-hmm. But there's a possible overcorrection there if we're not balancing it with the other, intellectual, spiritual, emotional components, which are every bit as masculine, but I fear in some levels are falling out of favor because they can be too easily associated with some of this other stuff, the feminization of men. How do you draw that? How do you draw that balance where it's like, no, we're gonna build the warrior. We're gonna develop the warrior. You have to. Right? That's the other thing. This is not an either or proposition, right? It's not like, well, I'm more of the warrior type and I'm more of the lover type. No, you got to be both. You were created to be both. So you're developing that warrior type. No joke. How do you balance it on the other side with the poet?
Fantastic question. So I do think an overcorrection's coming. I think a lot of boys have never gotten a rite of passage, an introduction into masculinity. And so we get older and grow facial hair. We look like men, but we don't feel like men. We feel like somebody should have dubbed us, you are now a man. And I felt it in my soul that, yeah, I am. And I am worthy, and I am strong, and I am a man. Nobody did that. Part of it's why we were shipped off to government schools, and then it was just college, which was really extending adolescence into this debauched, time-wasting facade where we were getting educated. Where was the big rite of passage? Yeah. Where did I do something hard, climb a mountain, and do something worthy of my strength, something that initiated me? And I think cultures over all human history have had different rites of passage and initiation for men. And frankly, we don't have that now. And worse still, our culture is waging such a war against masculinity. Not only do we not notice there's no initiation to masculinity, there's a complete undercutting of what masculinity is. We're encouraged to be sensitive and sweet and gender confused. It's as bad as you could possibly think. And so you tell men that they shouldn't be men anymore. And women, you really encourage them to be more masculine. Men, you encourage to be more feminine. And it ends up being this androgynous kind of postmodern deconstruction thing where you break down the genders because you really rage against any type of distinction, any type of truth, any type of category. And that's what postmodernism is. It's the destruction of all truth. And so this is just how it hit masculinity and femininity. Now, men, even if you tell them to be women long enough, guys, that doesn't sit well, and eventually we're going to break out and howl at the moon, because that's what dudes do. We've got fire in our souls. All of our favorite movie. It's Braveheart, unless you haven't seen Braveheart. And then you go watch the movie and you realize, oh, my favorite movie is Braveheart. And it's like, yeah, that's because you're a dude. You got a pair. So yeah, it's Braveheart or something very, very closely associated to that kind of theme. And so I find that really, really alarming. And I think you're right. There is going to be a huge swing. And already I'm seeing it with like the red pill crowd, the Tate bros. They're giving up on marriage. They're devoting their lives to just playing the field and going through women, and as conquest only, not committing, and living selfish, narcissistic lives that is all built on the vanities of huge bank accounts, Bugattis, and whatever the Tate bros are going. And what they don't realize is I think you can have a good bit of fun doing that for a little while. When you're done, you will be shocked to look in the mirror and realize you hollowed out your own soul. You wasted your best years. You've poisoned yourself so that now you're not fit to be a good father or a good husband. And you have done this Faustian exchange that you never really signed up for. You will die miserable and alone, and that type of lifestyle will wreck any type of real intimacy or integrity. You will destroy everything that matters most while you pursue this playboy lifestyle that it'll destroy you. And so people don't realize that. And this is what happens when you let warriors, without any of the wisdom of the poets, just go nuts. Rape, pillage, and plunder. There you go. Go nuts, warriors. And that is bad for the society, and that is perniciously bad for the individual as well.
Do you feel like we're because I've felt this for a while now. We actually did. It was funny because we just did a podcast on postmodernism. We called it A Brief History of a Bad Idea. And we talked about that. We talked about how this in this attempt to destroy meta narratives, it destroyed truth itself. And then we did another one on the battle between, we called it the battle between Tate and Peterson. With Jordan Peterson. And one of the things that we talked about in there was, it was funny, we didn't call it the warrior and the poet. We called it, I think it was like the soldier and the scholar. And it was this idea that both were necessary, but they weren't being properly encapsulated. Yeah. And it was this, because I have a great deal of respect for Peterson.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Andrew Tate, Tristan Tate, Justin Waller, a lot of these guys, there's a lot of things that they will say in a particular soundbite where I'll be like, I agree with that statement.
Absolutely.
But then I see the practical application and the emphasis and the focus, and it's okay, what end are you doing these things? And that's the part where for me the entire narrative breaks down, and I think you described it well. It's the idea of, again, go pillage, go conquer, go in the name of what? In the name of what? Because if it's just pleasure or it's just power, you are going to wake up one day and find you became a monster or a playboy, but the world is worse off because you were there.
Yeah, and
that is dangerous.
Enjoy your money, for you traded your soul for it.
Yeah.
Money is good. I'm like, hey, get money, and I've got money. You've got money. That's great. It's just not worth trading your soul for.
No.
Money is filled with all kinds of poverty that people don't realize. And so the idea is to get money and not have money have you.
Well, no, I think that's an excellent way to put it. I also think, and this is the part where I think on some level, you would think on some level you might find it intimidating, but I actually find it exciting. And as I talk to guys like you, as I talk to guys like Victor Marx, as I talk to other guys that are doing different things, but there's some similar convictions about the world they see around them and their role for pushing back against it. There is this kind of the feminization of men. Like there's that branch of males that cannot stand the idea of a man stepping up and filling in and developing those core responsibilities, duties, and whatnot with respect to the warrior side. There's the side of the warrior that kind of like that top G mentality where it's like, well, if you're not going around sleeping with a lot of women, that's because you're a low T male that just can't get it, and that's why you're doing it, right? That also despise it, and it's like they will stop turning on each other just long enough to turn on anybody that is saying, no, you're to be the warrior, you're to be the poet, and you're to do it into service for something great. And to be honest, as much as you should look at that and be like, well, if everybody's shooting at you, isn't that a problem? Like, no, it tells you you're doing the right thing in this particular case, because I think God created us to serve a purpose. And some of that purpose is universal, being the protector, being the provider, defending. That's universal among, I think all men have some obligation to do that. And then there's the individual task or mission that he's put us on. But what you will find with every man that I have met that is confident in who he is and what his job is and what his roles and responsibilities are to his wife, to his kids, to his God, to his community, whatever it is, they are always focused on a purpose or a meaning that is so much greater than just temporal wealth. And I have a feeling that what we're going to see is a lot of confused males who bought into one line that led them off in a direction that they found completely hollow, because it forced them to repress those aspects of their masculinity. And you're going to have this other branch that followed into this hedonistic quest to dominate and conquest, but in the name of nothing but their own pleasure. They're also going to wake up and fight, and they're going to be looking like, okay, where was the truth at? Yeah, where was the truth at? And yeah, please.
Here's something that's sad, and I want to speak on this, but at the same point, the very thing that gives me this as like an asset that I possess is the reason why I don't talk about it. But I would love to be able to pull a lot of young people aside and regale them with the beauty of monogamy. Now, so the Tate Bros and everybody following that, one night stands and whatnot, you can get some enjoyment there, and great in the moment. Not so great 2 weeks later, or 3 years later, or 30 years later. That's not quite as good. But whereas you can do the one night stand thing, a lot of those guys who know that, they never actually pursued one woman for year after year, building in an intimate relationship, knowing each other so well. Like me and my wife have PhDs in each other. We know we can communicate without speaking.
Yeah.
And bro, all I can say is that is a bonfire you guys know nothing about with your stupid little one night stands. Have fun. You're not having fun like I am. You aren't. Yeah. 17 years in, you aren't. My marriage freaking rocks, and you know nothing about, your one night stand. Yep, I know that, but you don't know what I have, and you won't pursuing that lifestyle. And so I do want, this is the most I've ever done to really kind of champion monogamy, but part of it is I'm like, this isn't something that I would air, like I'm filled with modesty, and I want to respect my wife's privacy.
Sure.
And anyway, but I'm doing it. I'm risking stumbling around a little bit awkwardly here in front of everyone, because I want them to know that there is a glorious prize on the end of happily ever after, pursuing the wife of your youth daily, year after year, gaining her trust. It is an incredibly masculine thing to do, to pursue one woman faithfully forever. There is riches there that you young people cannot imagine. And so I'll have to leave it there.
I love the way you described it. I remember I got married at 19, and I remember sitting there with a sergeant, and he had been married like 2 years. I think I had been married 3 at that point or something like that. And we were talking about things. I'm like, well, not to get too personal, because he asked me like, how old did you get married? I said 19. He goes, oh, so typical military comments about you can imagine.
Yeah,
and I said, I'm proud of the fact that I've only been with my wife. I'm proud of that fact. That's not an insult to me. And he looked at me and he goes, well, studies have shown, I love it when people start something out with that. Studies have shown that's actually not a good thing. You guys should have actually experienced more in other people before. And I said, oh, okay, cool. So when you're doing something really cool with your wife and she does something you really appreciate in that area, you think to yourself, dude, I'm going to have to write a thank you letter to whatever dude taught her that. That's what you think? And he looked at me and he was not happy, and he outranked me at that point. And he said, that's pretty effed up. I said, well, don't say stupid things and I won't have to point out that they're stupid.
Yeah, and the experts that he so aptly did not cite at all. He just said, they said. How many points have been tried to argue by relegating it to the nebulous they? They say. I'm like, whoa, pause. Who is they exactly?
Yeah.
Psychiatry today, I'm like, nope, I reject immediately. They think dudes can become girls.
Yeah.
So, nope, I'm not interested in what they say. But no, the studies actually do show the opposite. If you wait till you're married and you only experience that, the chances for having happily ever after, staying married, skyrockets. It is the more polyamorous that you are, the more people you've slept with is a wonderful predictor of divorce. If your body count, which I found out recently, body count isn't how many people you've killed, Nick. So if someone asked me my body count, and I totally went a different way with that. I'm like, okay, hold on. All right,
which tour?
Iraq. And so that's a different thing. But let's say you have a sexual body count through the roof. Your chances of staying married, faithful, and happy, they go down every time you sleep with a new partner. So that should be incredibly alarming.
There's an aspect of this too that you brought up that I think is really important that doesn't get mentioned, because a lot of times within the Christian community, there's this idea that, no, you should do this because it's the morally correct thing to do. And I absolutely stand by it. I absolutely believe but why is it the morally correct thing to do? It's the morally correct thing to do in part because of all of the emotional and spiritual aspects that are caught up within that level of intimacy with another human being. But it's the other thing that you said. And I love the fact that you used PhD, because I remember, again, another buddy of mine giving me a bad time. And I said, dude, you've got a GED in like 30 women. I've got a PhD in one. Who do you really think knows what they're doing in that aspect of their life?
Yeah.
Because if you're the sort of man that actually wants to if you're the sort of man that actually wants to be, a good husband to your wife in all aspects of your marriage, right? We're all keeping this PG, right? But if you want to be that man, if you want to be a man that she's just enthralled with, well, then you have to understand what is her key to intimacy.
That's right.
Because it's not necessarily the same for a man. Well, if you've decided to learn that by going out to the club and then a different girl every night in order to brag about, dude, I'm sorry, you never, in fact, not only have you not managed to unlock the secrets to intimacy with a woman that you truly love, respect, admire, and are passionate about, you are diminishing your possibility of ever being able to do that because of the baggage that you're bringing into that relationship. And when you recognize that one of the biggest things that she picks up from that connection, from that aspect of your marriage, it is not just the physical, not just the dopamine hits, right? It's the idea of for a woman, that's an incredibly vulnerable position. Yeah. And when you actually build that level of trust and communication and love and mutual respect, it's only after you've laid that groundwork do you get to go into the next level of what that intimacy can really represent. And to your point, if you're doing all this stuff over here, you are diminishing your ability of ever having this. What do you really want? Which direction are you going to go, young man? Do you want to go the direction of a bunch of just cheap dopamine hits over time? Because I get it. I get it. It's very appealing on some level, some superficial level.
For a while, and then you'll die alone.
And then you'll die alone. Yeah. And it will never, and this is the point that they need to understand, because they seem to think that guys like us are missing out. I'm like, brother, I
do not pity Tate. I'm not jealous of Tate.
No.
I truly pity him.
Yeah.
It is a very sad plight, and it's enraging that so many people follow after him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade what he has for what I have.
No.
He looks super unsuccessful and poor to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Is like, I don't want that for him. I don't want that for anybody. I want people to understand that, again, if we want to put it in these, masculine tones of this idea of conquest and whatnot, well, if you're able to fulfill, I believe, again, what is kind of that biblical approach, this idea, which you say that and people automatically think, well, this is just a theology, or that's just your faith, or that's just your belief. All right, fine. If you don't want to believe it from a theological standpoint, why don't we look at it from a logical, historical standpoint? Why don't we look at it from an empirical standpoint and recognize that, no, we understand these certain attributes that women bring to the table within a relationship. And if you as a man are not focusing on how to foster and develop that kind of relationship in order to lead the road down to that greater intimacy in all aspects of your life, dude, you're the one missing out. You left one of the greatest, uncharted areas of the map completely, off the table, because you were unwilling to actually display a certain level of discipline.
That's right. Yeah.
In order to create that. And I think again, we kept everything very respectful toward our brides and whatnot, but
we did.
If men with our experiences and our backgrounds and our things like that, because again, you instantly have credibility when you walk into the room with men on a masculine level because of what you've done, what you've chosen to do with your life, from the military, from going to the mission field, from going into difficult situations and honing those capabilities. And if they're not hearing it from men like you, that know that this is about, accomplishing what was all the manly stuff for? It was to protect the beautiful and the just and the noble. Yeah, that's right. And to and to not just protect it, but to be able to get it to experience it in every aspect that God would have us be able to experience it. And I don't want to just, again, I preach a lot of discipline to young men, but the other end, it's because at the end of that discipline is a fulfillment and an appreciation for things that God's created for us that you just can't get anywhere else.
That's right.
So I'm thankful that you talk about it, John. I think it's an important thing.
I think it is too. I'm glad to. I'm worried people listening in, maybe they settled a few years into a marriage, got kind of stale, stopped growing in intimacy. They're hearing us talk about hot fires, and they're like, man, I am not enjoying hot fires. We're logging time, but it's not really going anywhere. I wanted to pause and stop. I wanted to stop and speak to that. It is very possible to be in a marriage, and that marriage, though your years tick by, your marriage isn't growing. And if it's not growing in intimacy, you're actually losing intimacy. Then you end up in this sexless marriage. You end up being 20 years in, you logged some time, but you've really just become glorified roommates. And you're like, what in the world do I do about that? Or what if I'm trending in that direction? How do I make sure that doesn't keep going that way? Because marriage is something that can set you free, but you got to cultivate it. And here's the trick of, you got your bride by pursuing her a certain way. And then after getting her, you stopped pursuing her. And that's what happened. That's what went wrong. It's quite easy. You're supposed to pursue her like you did when you were dating. And you're like, well, I don't feel like it and I'm busy. Well, I'm like, well, do it anyway. Do discipline. And it's amazing how she will reward you. And then you'll reward her for that. And then she'll reward you. Her job. So ladies, you have a job in this. Your job is to seduce your husband forever. That's what we want. We want you to seduce us with every tool in your arsenal, and I don't just mean that. I don't mean that just sexually, but I also mean it sexually. And men, we're supposed to pursue them. She invites us to pursue. She seduces us, she draws us, and we go hunting. And you go hunt every day. Every single week, you should go on a date with your missus if things are bad. And hey, we're not able to do once a week right now. I wish we did, but I'm about to go take her to Rome for 2 weeks, so I'm like Rome, Italy, and, Switzerland, Austria. Anyway, we're going to go on a big 2-week trip. It's going to be awesome. So very, very fun, but we fell a few date nights behind. But anyway, keep pursuing your bride, and pursuing is in all the different areas. Mm-hmm. Every way that she needs to feel loved and cherished, that's how you pursue her. Yeah. And so if you're both doing that, things go really well. And then you're not just logging time. Your relationship keeps getting deeper and stronger and really, really fun.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, listen, I can't think of another question I would ask that would provide us a better sum up than what you just did there. But I do want everyone real quick to understand where they can find out more about what you're doing, Warrior Poet Society. Of course, I all think they should go out and get the Warrior Poet Way, the book that you just had come out.
Thank you.
Again, I'm in the middle of it right now and really enjoying it. But real quick, give us where can everyone find you?
Sure. Go to warriorpoetsociety.com. If you go to our main website, that's basically it goes out into all the different stuff. So warriorpoetsociety.com, you can buy our book. You can go check out our app and streaming service. You can check out shirts, and you can go see social media and YouTube, whatever you want to see. warriorpoetsociety.com is the place to do it.
That's great. And by the way, I've seen a lot more of your short form content coming out. It's great. So again, just well done. John, I want to, again, thank you. Thank your family for the work that you've done, the work that you continue to do. I definitely look forward. Really hope to be able to work with you some more in the future, maybe have you come on the show again when you write your next book. So again, and are you going to be at the Homesteaders Conference this year?
I am. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I think there's a dinner like the night before.
Okay,
for
yeah.
Just some folks. Anyway, maybe we'll see there. Boudreaux, the three
Boudreaux,
of us.
yeah, good deal.
We need to find a corner together and hang out. And
absolutely. Although I got to say, I'm gonna feel just a little bit lame because are you getting up there talking about defensive homesteads again and stuff like that?
No, I think I'm going to go a little bit more broad. So personal security concepts, home defense, and homestead. Last year, I thought I assumed my audience was all on board with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know, because I'm new to the homestead movement of like, we're off grid, we do all our own stuff, but as like joining in the movement, we didn't know that within the homestead community is a bunch of kind of more pacifistic hippie granola folks. And so I didn't really make the argument as much for this is why it is a good idea and it is a loving thing to do to increase some security measures. I just went full bore and said, all right, the marauders are coming. This is how you keep land. And
the barbarian horde.
I went to old field manual, hey, this is how you keep land.
Yeah.
Here's reconnaissance of I went into all kinds of crazy stuff. And
I loved it.
I won't make that mistake again. This year, I will spend a few minutes gathering up my audience, especially the granola, more pacifistic ones. So we'll bring them along.
I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, you get to talk about that. I'm gonna be talking about how they can actually work with with their legislators and whatnot in order to try to get food freedom legislation through and things and to also allow you to be able to protect yourself and engage in commerce and all of those things. But yeah, it's always amazing me now whenever I'm showing up to something and I'm there to provide political expertise, I'm like, man, I remember when I used to be cool. Anyways, John, once again, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody, please go out there, check out Warrior Poets Society. Check out the book, The Warrior Poet Way. I promise you're not going to regret it. It's a great book for you to read. Get that book for your son, right? Go through that together. And I'm going to take my own advice on that as well. So once again, thank you very much for joining us on Making the Argument. And John, we hope to see you again real soon in the future.
Thanks for having me, Nick.